So, good morning. Let us discuss about 5th December 2015 newspaper. The first article that is important is the Xi Jinping's visit to Africa. We already know that India-Africa summit was held in New Delhi, and China is also very strong in Africa. So, the Xi has a wider agenda in Africa. Already, the China has invested more than $30 billion in Africa, and in the latest trip, he has announced for $60 billion. Online with India-Africa Summit, China also have Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. So almost 50 countries participated over here, and Africa is becoming a new consumptive center for the Chinese goods. How is it happening? Now, if you see, overcapacities were created in China in construction, glass, cement, etc. So, Africa, the investments of China will make it absorb these overcapacities. It means new markets will be created for its goods so that the needs can be kept afloat. Especially after the global energy demand has come down and global demand as a whole has come down. And the real estate sector in China is also not growing properly because of the shadow banking and non-performance assets of the banks. In this context, Africa is a new hope for China and its manufacturing sector. And the second thing is the North-South corridor, which is coming in Africa, which is going to connect Durban in South Africa to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. It is a new infrastructure initiative which China can gain from. And on the other hand, Africa is also becoming a new war zone between the United States and Chinese powers. Recently, United States has announced for African fleet, that is US Africa Command. Now, China also established a logistical base at the Djibouti. Actually, this logistical base is seen as a cover for the Chinese military presence. And added to that, already a security cooperation is on cards between China and African Union, which talks about military cooperation against the terrorism and extremism. But however, it is indirectly trying to balance the US Africa Command. And the trade between China and Africa has reached more than $200 billion. And China's futuristic vision is like this. So by 2063, Africa has its own developmental agenda. The China want to harmonize its interests with the Africa's development agenda. So in this, China wants to connect entire Eurasia with its One Belt, One Road initiative. And along with the physical infrastructure, it is also talking about industrial parks, cyber optic cables, and also the smart cities across this particular North-South corridor. So a kind of industrial revolution is being boosted in Africa through the China presence. That is clearly visible in $220 plus billion plus trade between Africa and China, which is highest across any single country in Africa. And next is the Paris conference. So we know that India has already announced its INDCs, intended nationally determined contributions. Please try to recollect them once. They are very much important for your prelims and mains too. So in this case, India aims for 175 gigawatts of the non-conventional energy, in which 100 gigawatts is expected only from the solar energy. And it also wants to reduce the energy intensity by 33 to 35% based on 2005 levels by 2030. So this energy intensity and new conventional, non-conventional energy resources, that is going to cost India more than $2.5 trillion of expenditure. But if you see, as of now, the dollars flew into India are not more than $2.2 billion. And once this INDs comes into force, verification mechanism was set. By 2025, India also has to show certain clear demarcated achievements, which is going to increase its pressure on India. And India's specific developmental situation will not allow itself to give a peaking year. A peaking year means by what time the India's greenhouse gas emissions reaches to their peak or maximum level. On the other hand, China has already given that, which it says that the coal will peak by 2020 and all greenhouse gases will peak by 2030. That's what is the China's peaking years. India did not give any peaking years for INDCs. That is one thing which the world community, the developed community is objecting to. And another thing is G77 in China, they are very active in promoting the common but differential responsibilities, where the more responsibility has to be taken up by the developed world, who are historically responsible for the carbon emissions. The United States is highly objecting to this and it is not willing to take any historical responsibility. Now, what it can be argued is India also shall strongly suggest to this because of its huge financial needs. And the least developed nations and also the small island countries, these are talking about the peaking temperature should be restricted to 1.5 degrees C instead of 2 degrees C. Because once it reaches the 2 degrees Celsius, many of these island nations are going to be inundated or flooded. So in this context, the available carbon space is going to further decrease. It is not favorable to countries such as India, China and also oil exporting countries which are led by the Saudi Arabia. So in this context, India has opposed to such a move. And finally, we all know that the finance mechanism has to be strong. The technology transfers are going to determine the future energy needs. So in this context, United States of America, it talks about something called voluntary contributions. The phrase used by United States is in a position to do so. All the countries, including developed, developing, etc., who are in a position to contribute financially, shall give them to the developing countries to adopt and mitigate the climate change effects. So it means it trying to bring in developing nations also into the framework of climate change financing. And finally, there is another word which is objected, that is what is called as carbonization. So carbonization means the amount of the carbon used in the production of a particular good. If we are producing the cotton, now management, the cotton field management practices are leading to greater production of the carbon dioxide, then Indian textiles will not be imported by United States. This is what is described as a non-tariff barriers. So the non-tariff barriers can be imposed tomorrow by the name of the decarbonization. So that's why the developing countries are very apprehensive of this particular term at the climate change talks. This is what is happening as of now. And the Bill Gates, he started something called Breakthrough Energy Coalition. So not just the Bill Gates, it is all the tech entrepreneurs, they are investing in India in this Breakthrough Energy Coalition. From India, the Tata Group is a part of this. So what their primary argument is this: unless technological innovations happen, the trade-off between development and climate change cannot go away. Nowadays, what is the argument? So we have developmental needs. That's why we cannot cut down the carbon emissions. So that's why this cutting down of the carbon emissions shall happen through proper technological innovations. In this case, what they argue is wind and solar energy are not a solution, permanent solution. So the clean energy access, it depends upon the reliable energy. The major problem with this is intermittent nature of the supply of this energy. The solar and wind energy, they are intermittent. So in this context, the storage devices are becomes primacy, and it is going to provide for something called as high cost energy access. So one way these are talking about the next generation nuclear technology. So what is this next generation nuclear technology? You can talk about, I am giving a link in my notes, please go through that. So the Breakthrough Energy Coalition is majorly a coalition of the tech entrepreneurs to bring in technological innovation, in which 20 plus countries are also participating. And coming to the flag code, now we have fundamental duties. Article 51A subclause A. It talks that every citizen under fundamental duties has to respect the ideals and institutions of Constitution, the national flag and the national anthem. So the fundamental duties talks about the respect to this flag and anthem. Next is, there is a law which has come into existence after the Bangladeshi war, that is Prevention of Insult to the National Honor Act. Now, this will not talk about punishment to an individual who do not stand up while a national anthem or national pledge is going on. But they talk about a willful insult to a national flag. That is what is going to be a punishable offense. And emblems and names, Prevention of Improper Use Act, what it talks about is necessary permissions are important from the government to use them as symbols for any commercial purpose. And the next is, the Supreme Court has already clarified that in Bizo Emmanuel and State of Kerala case. What is this case is all about? His daughters, they were going to a school, and then these people, they are not willing to stand when Janagana Mana is going on. So they were expelled from the school. Then the issue was challenged in the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said the religious freedoms or freedom to have a religion and freedom of speech, they take primacy over the obligations created by the state. So it means that a student cannot be expelled for college for taking a defense of his religion. So in that context, the Supreme Court has given primacy for the liberties of the people rather than the restrictions imposed by the state. Another sign which is going on in the country is the patriotism is getting narrowly defined as Zingoism, that is centered around a few national identities. So it is going to obstruct the broader liberties or fundamental rights of the people. That is how the article is argued. But for the examination purpose, how the national heritage, national anthems and symbols of sovereignty and integrity of the nation are protected, try to have an idea of these and this particular Supreme Court judgment. And next, coming to the Indian soils. 1/3 of the Indian soils are already degraded. The reason majorly is the rain and wind erosion. But however, human activity, that is urbanization, deforestation, pesticide use, all these are also degrading the soil. This pesticide use, intensive cropping system, this is the major reason for the loss of the organic matter in the soil and the depletion of the biodiversity in the soil. So this needs an immediate attention to secure our food sovereignty and to bring in the access to the food to every citizen in the country. Now, if you take our bureaucracy, the next article, that is top IFS posts still out of bound for SCs and STs. So among the IFS, Indian Foreign Service, most of the people from the lower communities, they are confined themselves to the lower positions, and their chances to represent at the higher levels, that is at the level of ambassadors and high commissioners, is very less. That is disproportionately less. The major reason being is many of these people, they have these systemic deficiencies because of the poor language skills which are necessary, which are majorly necessary for diplomacy. It is due to the quality of education and the rural background of these students. So in this context, how to make the bureaucracy more representative is a question. So especially with regard to the allied services that can determine the future of India. That's what is the article talks about. So try to have an understanding about the representative bureaucracy and its challenges, and fighting an Islamic State. This article has come into existence due to recent passage of UK House of Commons to fight against the Islamic State. Now, is UK's entrance into this fight or Germany's entrance into this fight is going to change the game? If you carefully observe, the fight against IAS is most or can be seen as a failure of coordination. You know, the Russia has recently entered into fight, but the Russian forces, they are not willing to work with the United States, and United States is the same case. In this context, you can remember that the Turkey has recently fight against Russian plane, or got down the Russian plane, which has got a very strong reaction from the President Putin. So the strategy of United States is to bring down the existing regime by supporting the rebels. On the other hand, Russia says that a strong state is only the solution for the Syrian crisis. And the next is the Turkey. It is said to be actually cooperating the Islamic State by facilitating the oil sale of the oil which was controlled by the Islamic State. Especially the major revenues for the Islamic State are coming from the sale of this oil. And after this, the Quds are the strong forces that have shown greater viability to fight against the Islamic State. But the Turkey is bombing on these Kurdish areas because Kurds are seen as extremists by the Turkish government, Erdogan's government. So this coordination challenges, unless met, the fight against Islamic State will not be complete. This is what we can convey. And the startup ecosystem in India. So the NASSCOM chief, Mr. Mohan Reddy, what he says is the laws, financial support, the tax coding systems, these are going against for a strong startup ecosystem in the country. Now, initially a startup is not expected to focus on the paperwork. But however, Indian system expects a startup to be perfect on the paperwork, then to think and evolve his ideas. So, providing for e-filing and strong simplified tax systems are very essential. And the next is the bankruptcy laws in the country. They are very stringent, which is taking 10 to 12 years to close a particular company. And these needs to be improved towards improving the startup climate. These are the articles of importance today. And I'm uploading my notes too. Please read the link articles which I gave you from the other international newspapers to understand these things better. Thank you very much. All the best.